our next session is only going to be even more interesting because we're going to be talking about the Great Resignation. It's a trend I think we've all heard a lot about, particularly coming out of Western markets. And we're going to look at whether it's happening in Asia. Is it real? Does it matter? And to lead and moderate this session, I'd like to hand over to Sarah Crawshaw, who is Managing Director of Anna Whitlam People and Tineo Talent Advisory. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Arun. Well, when Arun told me this was the title of this session, I got very excited. I think it's it's a really interesting topic and a big topic. And with me here today is Bhavana from BASF, who leads BASF communications in the region. And I know, Bhavana, you've done a lot around D&I communications in the past, which I think is a theme that feeds into this. We've got Liz from Archetype, who is the managing director of their business in Hong Kong, and will be talking to us from the sort of consultancy side of things. And then Dawn here in Singapore from LinkedIn, who I think can speak from two angles. Dawn looks after internal communications, employee engagement for the region, and I know has some very interesting data points on this topic from the LinkedIn side of things. So yes, I thought it might be interesting to sort of just frame this topic a little bit, in a rather timely fashion. Edelman put out a special report this week, part of their trust barometer. I don't know whether Arun had given them a tip that we were doing the session or not, but entitled The Belief-Driven Employee. And I think this is something that very much feeds into this topic, this theme around employees becoming an increasingly important stakeholder group for businesses, and becoming more powerful as a stakeholder group with that. And that report that they put out, they surveyed 7,000 people in the major economies of the world, some of which were here in Asia, China, Japan, India. And there were some quite interesting things that came out of that. That piece around employees now being, from this sort of representative group, the most important stakeholder group, according to the respondents. Burnout now a bottom line issue, which is hardly a surprise given the dynamics of the last 2 years. And I think one of the interesting things was a lot of people, 43% of respondents, feeling that their employer is not taking the issue seriously enough. And then this piece around, I guess it feeds into the retention and attraction of talent, that those leaving their current jobs and companies were looking for not necessarily higher pay, but actually companies that offer them a better lifestyle and that have, I guess, are more in tune with their values and beliefs. The pertinent to Asia, and what was quite a surprise to me actually, was that the majority of respondents from the whole selection of this survey said that they choose a company based on values and beliefs first and foremost. That trend was led by the China respondents, where 87% of those respondents chose their employers on that basis, which I think is really interesting, because when when Arun told me the title of this presentation, I thought, is this a trend that we're really seeing here in Asia? In all honesty, I'm not sure. And so I guess that's what we're here to get to the bottom of. And first off, I'd love to just hear from each of you about your sort of observations around attracting and retaining talent. How has this changed in recent years? And what's the future trajectory? Dawn, I know you've got some data on this from the LinkedIn side, so perhaps we can start with you.
Sure. Can you guys hear me all right?
We can, yes.
That's great. At LinkedIn, we're calling this moment of change the Great Reshuffle. It's where employers, employees alike, they are like what you mentioned. They're rethinking not just how and where they work, but why they work. So the future of work is something that I think everybody is thinking of, and we see that being driven by two major trends. The first is flexibility and trust. We did a recent survey with more than 500 C-level executives in the US and the UK, asking them what's top of mind when it comes to future of work. Flexibility and trust came out tops. And with 87% of people, employees saying that they prefer to work remotely half the time. Companies need to recognize and start adapting their workplace to offer greater flexibility. I think the most telling data that we've been seeing so far, it's the continued growth of remote jobs posted on LinkedIn. So the share of remote jobs we've seen so far has grown about nearly 8.5 times since the start of the pandemic 18 months ago. So it was about maybe 2% of global job posts in March, and then it's grown to nearly 17% last month. So flexibility and trust, that's really key when we talk about future of work. And the other trend that we are seeing so far is skill-based hiring and enabling access to learning. So, COVID, the digital transformation, have accelerated a hiring trend that we've been seeing, that skills are valued over traditional education qualifications. And I see a win-win for both employees and employer. For employees, that broaden that skill set, and for employer, it's that you have that increase of talent pool. So take for example, food servers, who lost their job during the pandemic. We found that they have 70% of the skills that is needed to be a customer service specialist, which is actually one of the most in demand jobs on LinkedIn. So with greater awareness on skills, I think we can improve the equity of job matching in this part of the world. And actually, to do this at scale, what we're piloting out from Singapore is we're partnering the Singapore government and the companies here to roll out what we call a skill path pilot, where we're encouraging companies to hire based on skill. Truly, I think the key takeaway is that mindset change, hire based on skill versus traditional qualification.
It's an interesting, the data you mentioned there at the start, Dawn, was obviously US and UK centric. I'm keen to sort of understand, drilling into sort of Asia, whether we really are seeing this trend towards more flexible working. My observation is really that that is a much slower burn here. But I'm keen, Bhavana, perhaps you can talk from a sort of, at BASF, it's a big organization. It's a German headquartered organization. It's a traditional organization.
Absolutely.
What can you speak to in terms of the culture and whether there's been a sort of shift in terms of that flexibility?
Sure. Thanks for that question. And I'm just sort of building on what Dawn said, right? And at BASF, we're seeing this shift very clearly in Asia as well. So the future of work, and when we're sort of building teams, and now everything is so virtual. So I'll just zoom in a little bit on my current situation. I'm building a team in Kuala Lumpur because that's going to be our hub for communications going forward, where we will be servicing all of Asia Pacific sitting in KL. And the situation in KL is such that everybody's working remotely, everyone's working from home, and I'm hiring and onboarding people completely remotely. And I'm hiring for, basically starting all the way from China to Australia, New Zealand, and that requires a different kind of mindset. And Dawn spoke about this. I mean, one is basically the flexibility, the trust that you have when you're hiring people, letting them, work remotely, because my entire team sits away from me. And, there's a trust factor that you need to build in when you do that kind of hiring and building of teams. And definitely, I think at BASF, we're seeing this, and the future of work is something that we're very heavily focused on. Mm-hmm. So, things like traditionally core working hours, you have to be in office at a certain point in time, you have to leave at a certain point in time, those things are being completely broken down. You define your core working hours, you define, when are the days you want to come into work, when do you want to bring your teams in together. So that's the kind of future we're working towards. And also in terms of our workplace, flexible sort of options, more collaborative spaces. That's the outlook that we have when we're building up these teams. And I think what's most important is, Dawn mentioned this as well, in terms of when you're hiring people, building teams, looking at, what do you want? Skills in the very traditional sense is no longer what we look for. For example, in my team currently, we're building, we want language skills. We want people who can speak the Korean language, Thai language, Vietnamese, but they're in KL. And it's very difficult to sometimes find all of this with the communication background. So we have people coming in from controlling background, we have people coming in from supply chain background, but they want to be in communications and they have that interest to learn and to be part of teams. So I think here, what's important to recognize is, why do they want this? What's the purpose? What is that they're seeing in this? So I think very important things that we need to think about is, how do you show them the how and why of working, and then understand what they want and bring them in understanding the purpose. So I think a lot of different points in a nutshell, pretty much what Dawn also spoke about. It's really about thinking flexibly, having a different mindset, and building that trust and flexibility for your teams.
Liz, I know you've done a bit of an exercise of talking to various colleagues around the region about some of the things they're seeing in respect to attracting and retaining talent. Tell us a little bit about those themes and how it differs from market to market.
It definitely differs from market to market. We are noticing it, and I think to your original point, we're definitely noticing it across the region, but it's manifesting to different degrees and in different ways. And what has been noticeable is that those markets that have been impacted more severely by COVID, be it India, where everybody has been impacted from a health perspective, through to other markets where perhaps they've had extended lockdowns, they seem to be the ones that, where people really are looking for that new sense of purpose and looking for a different role or a different lifestyle, versus somewhere like Hong Kong, maybe, where we've not been impacted quite so much. So we see it in Australia, we see it in India. We've had people, really coming to us and saying, we really want to do something completely different. I want to be a stand-up comedian. Yeah. I want to go back and study. I want to be a teacher. And it is that purpose-driven choice that they are making.
Yeah. Yeah, Bhavana, on that note, again, just leaning to you because you do come from the more traditional business line here. Are you struggling to attract talent, the sort of younger generations? What are you seeing at BASF generally in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, no, I don't think we're struggling. We are a very old world manufacturing chemical company, but I think what's really working for us is the fact that we're able to look at what's happening, these trends, and really understand what people want, and we're already changing. We're definitely among the first when it comes, at least in our industry, when it comes to these new practices, understanding what people want and catering to that. So definitely I would say that we're not having a problem with attracting talent, but in this scenario, it's a little bit different. Like I said, we are building out these hub teams, and usually in hub structures, what happens is the kind of talent that you get is younger. They want different things. They don't want the old traditional, I want job stability, or I want very solid work place, solid work time. It's more about what can I learn, how can I come into a very different atmosphere, and how can I bring my working style into this very set organization? Yeah. So that's where I think we're doing a lot of, talking to our teams, figuring out how do we bring in such a diverse team together to work together, find a purpose for that team. I think that's very interesting. And the attracting part, and what's really also for me, been insightful is that when we've been hiring people and asked them, why do you want to join BSF? It always goes back and very, very commonly to the fact that, oh, I always look at BSF and I think they're so focused on sustainability. There's a purpose to what you're doing and I want to join your organization. So it's very purpose driven. And that's one of the highlights when I'm hiring people. So it's been an interesting insight there.
Yeah, I'd love to come back to that point about culture, diversity, and that piece in a moment. Dawn, I'd love to get your perspective. I know you've also got some data on this, a little bit about sort of traditional businesses versus new generation, newer companies, and what we're seeing in that respect in terms of the war, the war on talent, as everyone likes to call it. Do you think that traditional businesses, the blue chips of this world that have been around for many, many years will continue to be able to attract the same talent, and particularly in this part of the world?
Yeah, I like to shift the conversation slightly. I think, be it traditional or newer generation companies, I think it comes down to the culture of the company and how that culture lead to you fulfilling your mission and your vision as a company. And therefore, employer branding has never been more important. How do you connect? How do you draw in the prospective candidate? And how do you bring them along the journey by showcasing your value, your purpose, like what Bhavna mentioned, employees are attracted to her company because it's a purpose-driven company. And also, what is the impact you're making in this world? In terms of data, what we've seen, job seekers on LinkedIn, they are 1.8, nearly 2 times more likely to apply to a job if they recognize the brand, they recognize the company. And if you think about it, a company and a business in this day and age is a brand. And a brand is, I always believe a brand is no longer opaque. It needs to be transparent. And I think that COVID has put that additional pressure for brands and companies to be more accessible to both internal and external stakeholders. I think the first session, that discussed about how companies are now caught on to make a stand in the activist era. I think that really builds to the brand that you want to build as a company. And, for an internal stakeholder, and like what you mentioned earlier from the Adamant Barometer Trust survey, it's, employees are your biggest asset. And why don't tap on them to share with their network, your company culture and what draws them in. Like, for example, and my colleagues and I, we joined LinkedIn because we're attracted to the culture and to the purpose and the mission of the company. Likewise, I think any of us in this audience, when you go and look for a job, I think it's that culture that first draw you in. And I think that comes as a result, of the brand that you want to build around the company.
Yeah. Liz, I'm going to turn a bit to you on this. We had a conversation previously a little bit about the thought process that Archetype is going through in respect to this, how to create the right environment for your people to attract them, to keep them engaged, to creating a culture that they want to be part of. Whilst I don't want you to give away too many trade secrets, it would be great to just hear a little bit about how do you address these situations?
It's work in progress. We're still learning. And I think we're at a critical juncture for all of us, for both employees and employers, for businesses like BSF and agencies alike. I guess for us, we sort of also are looking at the sort of 2 trends. So that sort of work from home flexibility piece, and then hiring for skills, and then also providing a culture and an environment where people do feel trusted, where they do feel empowered, and they do feel a sense of belonging. So through that, what we're sort of doing is in terms of the flexibility piece, and I think, again, we're working our way through this. There was a point last year where we had a conversation about, do we let everyone work from home? That's not realistic, certainly in the markets we're in, where a lot of people are living in multi-generational families or small apartments. So what we have done is introduced a hybrid working, and it's very, very flexible, and it's very much employee driven. So you make work for you. Like Bhavna said, flexible hours, with the sort of 9 to 6 idea of work is something that's inherited from 1950s America. It's not relevant now. When it comes to that sort of employee piece and creating that culture, it's something that I think Archetype's always been good at. And I know when I joined the business last year, it was the biggest appeal, because for me and my life stage and with my lifestyle, that was something that was important. But it wasn't formalized. And over the last year, what we have done is just looked at what are the important factors. We've engaged people in that process and formalized it a little bit more. So we introduced something called the Archetype Way, which is basically making work for you. It's about setting boundaries about when you're online and offline. It's about having deep work days, digital detoxes. We have a mental health platform, so mental health support for every employee and their families. And that just became formalized and crystallized. It's still being iterated, and I'm sure it will change as we move forward. And then the third piece around the sort of hiring people for skills or hiring people in a way that suits their lifestyle is something that I think we're only just beginning to start doing. So as Dawn said, sort of looking at people who've got the right skills and the right mindset, really, to be in our business, rather than looking at their experience or qualifications. We have a number of people within the business in the region who have got side hustles or their own businesses or are doing other things as well. And where possible, we try and work with that. So one of our webmasters in KL actually works a 4-day week. The 5th day is spent on his own business. Likewise for working parents, just trying to make work for them as much as possible, introducing flexibility, because they're valuable assets and we don't want to lose them.
It's quite interesting. I mean, I think we've got a sort of panel of people representing very progressive companies, in my opinion. And I mean, I've heard some absolute horror stories recently that have made my jaw drop in terms of companies just not showing that degree of flexibility and that progressive mindset to the direction in which we're traveling. I heard a story the other day about somebody who was on maternity leave, lost their domestic helper at the last week of their maternity leave, and needed time to find a new one. And her company said, "Don't come back. You can either come back next week or not at all." Yeah. So I think that it strikes me that my view is the companies that are going to win this war, if you like, on talent are the ones who are progressive. But it amazes me how many organizations are out there and are not, frankly. And it sort of brings me to this piece about, to a certain extent, and it's a terrible stereotype, but sort of generational differences. And this is a big one in terms of, I guess, trying to bridge mindsets, different ways of working, culture, as we're in a day and age where actually, people are working well into their 70s, who have come from that generation of, a very much more traditional working hours set, etc. How do you navigate that? And Bhavna, I perhaps turn to you because I know, you have looked at, I guess the D&I piece before and in very specifically in roles that you've done.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a very interesting question, Sarah. I mean, and in a company like mine especially, and I also, just to give you a little bit of a personal story, when I moved from an agency background into the corporate world, and BSF was my first corporate job, and I was really scared of how it's going to be, because agencies have a very different work culture, and corporates, especially a corporate like BSF, I thought would have a very different work culture. But it was very interesting to see that everybody had their own space, and this was sort of, it really comes in that sense from the culture of the workplace, right from the top to the bottom. And then the way we have driven it, at least in BSF, is that whenever we look at any sort of change or rollout of initiatives, we take a cross section of people and we bring them together and say, let's talk about it. And I think it's really that thing of saying, let's talk about it, let's put everything on the table, let's discuss what the issues are and then come to a solution, rather than saying that, oh, but this is not going to work for a certain set of people, this is going to be opposed by someone else. I think it's always good to have that cross section of people, bring them together, have them debate, have them have these open chats, and I think delve deep. That's what's helped us. And we've been doing this from a D&I perspective as well, having this, and we're a very matrixed organization as well. So we have business units, we have corporate centers, we have platforms, we have different sort of teams. And how do you bring all of them together? Because what works for one doesn't work for the other.
Yeah.
So what we've realized in the long run is, of course, you can roll out policies and stick to it, or you can come together, discuss and debate, come up with some sort of a guideline and framework, and then let people drive it the way they want, because one size doesn't fit all, and especially in such large organizations. So that's what really worked for us.
Yeah. Interesting.
Can I add to that?
Please do,
Sarah?
Liz.
So it's something that we come across as well. And I actually joined Archetype last year, and I'm the eldest employee by far in the office. I've also switched industries, and I think it's been such a remarkable experience because I've learned so much from my younger colleagues. So when it sort of comes to that age factor, I think there's so much to be gained by, as Bhavna says, bringing people together, having those conversations, introducing reverse mentoring or mentoring, whether it's formal or informal, and that skills sharing. So younger people often benefit from older people's experience, and in turn, we can learn, about how to use different tech platforms that I might be struggling with.
Yeah.
So many companies sort of focusing on DE&I and then neglecting age, and there's this pitting of generations against each other, which I think just creates further problems rather than collaboration and an inclusive environment.
Yeah, yeah. Dawn, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting time that we're living in. I think never have we seen 5 generations working together. And as a company, we have to find a way for everybody to work well. And I think every one of us will become an older worker during our career with declining, birth rate, etc. Building on what Bhavna and Lee said about, really that diversity piece is really important. What we have done at LinkedIn, and I believe it's also it's also done in some other companies, to have employee resource groups where it's that create that space of belonging, by connecting underrepresented or historically excluded employees and allies together. So in LinkedIn we have about over 10 employee resource group from parents and LinkedIn, which I belong to. So I'm a working mom with 2 young kids, including one that was born last year. So it was about, finding that sense of belonging while working remotely with a like-minded group of individuals. And then our latest ERG is actually called Wisdom. And it brings workers that's, 40 and above and their allies together, making sure that, our company is that place for everyone to thrive in regardless of age. So yeah, something to add from my side.
Sure, that's great. Since we're nearly heading towards the end of time, I'd like to throw it out to questions, if there are any. Arun?
Do I need a mic? Oh, no. Okay. So we've got a question actually from, it's for Liz, from my colleague, Maya, who's Provoke's EMEA editor. And it's actually a question we kind of have come to refer to it as the Shrubbery Question. And I may have mentioned it to you before, but when we talked to an agency CEO who said to us that they were finding lots of people are leaving the industry and to go and do things like landscape gardening. And she said, we can't compete with shrubbery.
Yeah.
And so my question to you is, can you compete with shrubbery?
Probably not, no. And if that's what somebody really, really wants to do, we're never going to be able to compete. Like if that's somebody's absolute passion, then we're not going to be able to compete. But maybe as they're setting up their shrubbery business and realizing that it doesn't earn much money initially, perhaps there's a more flexible way of working with us, so whereby we help them do the shrubbery business while still working with us. It's not necessarily realistic in the long term. They're going to carry on doing shrubbery. I think the key to that, though, is really looking beyond our immediate industry and going to that sort of piece around hiring for skills. So what are the other parallel industries where people might be looking for a different experience or something new that we could recruit from? And I think we're all working this out. I feel it's like the pandemic at large. No one knows the answers. No one knows when this is going to end. We don't know what the future is going to hold. So we're kind of working through it. But for the shrubbery people or the hairdressers or the stand-up comedian, it's like, how can we help you do what you want to do and yet retain some of your value and talent in our business?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one also because it's often assumed that people will go out to do something that may not make them as much money, but actually, the other thing that's happening right now is with the digital economy and all these people can make a lot of money without having a traditional job. And I think that's really what's coming down the line for businesses, is that attracting the smartest, the brightest, the most astute in the future is going to become harder and harder, because if they can make all the money they need through another channel, it's all going to be about the purpose, the value, the culture.
Maybe, just to add to what Liz said, and you said as well, Sarah, we don't need to really compete with the shrubbery business. I mean, how do you complement it? And Liz was saying, it's not like if they're going to do it for a long time, great. But then maybe we just say that, okay, how do we work with it together? The gig economy is great right now. It's really growing. And then how do you say that? How do you bring in people, get them to do things that, okay, they probably do shrubbery on the side, but they also do something that they're passionate about when it comes to, the mainstream work in that sense. How do you marry that together? How do you give people the confidence to say, if I'm going to go to my leader, or if I'm going to go to my team and say, hey, I'm going to take a couple of hours off because I need to go tend to my, shrubs, you're okay with it, right? You're not going to say that, no, I mean, this is like your working time and how are you going to do that? Versus saying, cool, I mean, if you're able to manage your work and deliver what you have to, you can do whatever you want. You can tend to your shrubs, you can go get a haircut, you can go for a swim, and then come back to your work. And I think that's pretty much how we are looking at our teams right now, giving a lot of empowerment to them, which also means a lot of responsibility. And it's a two-way street. And I think that's where you need to build that whole relationship to say, be open, have that trust, engage and care for them, get personal. I think that's where this entire thing would help.
Yeah. I think we're up on time. So thank you to all three of you. We could have gone on all afternoon. And yeah, delightful. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. Fascinating conversation. And as Sarah said, I think it's one that can go on, and I suspect will go on in the coming months.